Welcome to another great edition of the Open Skies podcast. I'm your host, Chris Glass, and I am with
Simon Soni. It's great to be here, Chris.
Simon. Thank you so much for doing this.
You're very welcome.
This is our second podcast as a standalone Open Skies podcast.
Congratulations.
So we broke off to really tell the hidden side of airlines and the stories about the industry we love so much. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for being on here. I wanted you to come on the pod because we've worked together in the past, and I've seen the work you do at helping develop in-flight service and making world-class products out of that. So I wanted to have you on to talk about that. So thank you for coming.
Very grateful for being here. It's great. You know, it's good to know that this is going on, and to have this in Calgary is amazing. So it's good to be here.
Awesome. So why don't we start by talking about how you got started in aviation? What got you started on this journey?
To be honest, it was a little bit by accident. I spent a lot of time as a kid traveling backwards and forwards across the Atlantic as a school person, going backwards and forwards to school, which wasn't a lot of fun. I left the parents at one side, I ended up school at the other side. I didn't eat on the aircraft. It was in the days when there was a big movie screen and there were sort of pneumatic headphones. Yeah. There was no individual IFE. The food was terrible. It smelled terrible. It all tasted really badly. Sorry, anybody who worked in the industry in those days, but it was really, really poor. And it was horrible, but I did that for years. And when I went through school, college, I never thought about going into airlines.
Right.
I ended up doing a hotel management degree. I spent some time working in hotels and then ended up falling into airlines. I've been in airlines now for 30 years? 30 plus years, yes.
It's funny. I remember my career in airlines started with my dad throwing a newspaper at me with a help wanted circle around. He goes, "Hey, there's an airline run by people like you. You should apply." And I ended up having a 20-year career out of it. So
I joined British Airways, and I was like, I wasn't expecting to join them. I was expecting to join a hotel company, and I just saw an ad, and I thought, oh, I'll apply.
Right.
And then I got the job, and I thought I'll be here for a few years. I stayed for a lot.
British Airways is an iconic airline.
Absolutely.
You know, they are one of the ones that I think of when you think of world-class airlines. So tell me what it was like back then working for them.
It was amazing. It had recently come out of privatization. It was a government-owned industry. Before then, it was part of Imperial Airways, or spun off from Imperial Airways, British Overseas Airline Corporation, BOAC, British European Airways, merged into British Airways and were privatized, I think in 1984, something like that. I joined sometime after that, but it was relatively recent. And it was still amazing. They had old offices with, if there was a senior general manager, they had wood paneled doors, they had carpet outside their offices. But if the person moved office, the carpet moved and the door moved with them. So It was all very old fashioned, very civil service. It's changed now.
Right.
And businesses are cyclical and everything changes and moves on.
What did you do for British Airways back then?
I did so many things. I joined on a graduate training program, and I worked in sales, I worked in communications, I worked in systems development, I worked in training. I actually trained people in how to use computers and how to use computer data.
Wow.
Which is so far from what I'm good at.
I was going to say, it's absolutely not the world I know you in.
It's so not me. But it was good fun. I did lots of things. I worked in new business development, lots of different things. And I kept coming back to the in-flight product. Okay. The catering team, how you put food on an aircraft, how you actually find a way, really, of catering for people 5-star food at 30,000 feet. And it's tough. And it kind of grabbed me. And although I went around lots of different parts of the business, I kept going back to that area. And in the end, by the time I left the business, I was running the onboard catering for British Airways globally, which was pretty cool.
So what does that entail? Walk me through running catering for an airline like that.
Well, for most airlines, they don't have their own catering company. So a lot of them do. A lot of them did. Probably fewer of them do now. But you end up working with a lot of suppliers, a lot of contractors. So most airlines will not have their own kitchens. So you have to find kitchens in the places that you're flying who can provide the food. And there are some very big global flight catering companies you can go to who have kitchens on or near airports to, if you like, cook all the sausages and the chicken breasts and make all the mashed potatoes that you need on your flights and put it on the aircraft. So you have to find those. You have to decide what service you're going to offer. Some will offer the champagne and the steaks, and some will offer a packet of pretzels, and some will offer a Diet Coke that they want you to buy for $5. And
or my favorite, the ham and cheese croissant.
The ham and cheese croissant that is one of the most popular items you can put on board.
It broke my heart when that came off the aircraft because I get that all the time. Okay, so when you're dealing with all those different kitchens, one thing that strikes me is consistency must be a huge problem. It must be like when you're flying to different countries, your guests, your customers expect a certain level of consistency across the airline, yet you're landing in different places and different countries with different rules and different kitchens. How did you deal with the consistency side of it, especially for British Airways where it's so global?
Well, when it's global, a lot of the things people expect when they get on board is a taste of the destination.
Right.
So, I'm going to Japan. I'd like a taste of Japan when I get on my flight in London.
Right.
Your ability to provide something authentic in London is not that great. If you're trying to provide a taste of Japan, you'd be better off doing it the other way. But the customer wants it out of London, and the same out of Japan. They want a taste of the UK, but the kitchens are at the wrong end of the route. So you've got to spend a lot of time educating them, working with them. One of the times I was working actually with food coming out of one of the places that British Airways were flying to, and they were having a cottage pie on board. And we kept getting great reports from this cottage pie in first class, how wonderful it was. It was like so wonderful, but it has white stuff in it. And people were saying, we're not really sure what the white stuff is. So could you look at it? It tastes great, but we don't know what it is.
You're confused.
I think there shouldn't be white stuff in the cottage pie. We went to the kitchen, looking through the process in the kitchens, and found they were putting cottage cheese in it. Because you would. They didn't know. So, I don't know where they got that recipe, but it's like, no, it shouldn't be there. But it was just a communication challenge, which is why you have to send people around the world checking on the food to make sure it's as you would expect.
So travel is key, right? Being able to go.
You've got to be able to go and
100%.
see it. And you, much as I love the suppliers, and I'm good friends with a lot of the suppliers that I've worked with over the years, you've got to keep on them, because you might be one airline out of 40 or 50 that they're dealing with.
Right.
It's a very manual operation for them, so they will have a lot of staff who are doing this, perhaps not the same staff day in, day out.
Right.
And mistakes creep in, human errors creep in, and so you've got to be there to basically just check that things are as you want them to be.
Right. So after British Airways, you spent some time in the Middle East.
Yeah, so I went from British Airways to Virgin Atlantic.
Oh,
which was
yes,
quite a
sorry.
change. So
I forgot about Virgin Atlantic.
I went from, if you like, the big player in the market to the smaller challenger brand in the market, which was an absolutely amazing transition. And they had a very different challenge that they wanted my help with. Very modern outlook, very, very trendy, very cool brand, and had some really interesting challenges they had, because they were a very small business, but because of their marketing, punched well above their weight. I think everybody thought they had a huge scale, but actually they only had sort of 20 or 30 aircraft when I worked with them. And people thought, and probably today, think that they're much bigger than they actually are because of the marketing.
Right. Great brand, you think, big brand. Size.
Yeah. And we did a whole lot of contract work with them, a lot of change work with them. But then I got a call from a friend of mine who said, have you ever thought about going to the Middle East? I was like, well, no. Why? And they had a great opportunity out there in Abu Dhabi with Etihad Airways.
Right.
So I went to work for them for a few years. And from there, I went to Qatar Airways for a few years, which was equally amazing. I mean, it's frequently the world's best or the world's second best airline, depending on which rating system you look at. Absolutely amazing place to work.
So when you become I guess a steward of such a great reputation, like both of those two airlines had, like Etihad and Qatar have such great reputations for in-flight service, that has to be intimidating. Walking into that kind of aura.
It is and it isn't, because the challenges are exactly the same. Your ability to get a bread roll on an aircraft in London or in Winnipeg or in Sydney, Australia, it's just the same. It's the same problems. Generally, the aircraft that all the airlines fly are pretty much the same. The galleys, the kitchens on board, they're pretty much the same.
Either a Dreamliner or an Airbus.
Yeah, it's a Boeing or an Airbus. The ovens are the same ovens they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. The food comes on and off in trolleys. It gets rattled around as the aircraft takes off, as it goes to an aircraft on a truck.
Right.
It's, you don't have a lot of skill. I always joke with people, there's no flambe on board. There's no way of doing any of that fancy stuff, but you've got to get the food looking like it was freshly prepared.
Right.
And it's great if you can work with an airline who has a chef on board. So Etihad had chefs to work in their first class cabin. Turkish Airlines have chefs on board.
Really?
And they are there to really finish and plate the food so that it looks like it was just prepared from a restaurant kitchen. And they can add some flourishes and some touches,
Right.
but they're not actually cooking the food on board. The food was cooked on the ground, it was loaded cold, and it's being reheated. So there's very few airlines who actually do much in the way of cooking on board. Maybe they'll make some scrambled egg if you're in first class.
Right. Okay. So walk me through, because I think that's news to people that aren't in the industry. I knew we're not cooking the food on the aircraft, but I don't think people really understand the process from getting their a high class first class meal. How does it start? Where does it start?
It starts months before it ever gets to the aircraft.
So
there's a whole process of people sitting in an office, chefs usually for an airline, working with the catering company to come up with a menu. Right. So they will work with the marketing team to understand, well, what should lunch on board this airline look like? How many appetizers? How many main courses? How many desserts? Are we having cheese? Are we not having cheese? Are we having champagne before that? What drinks do we have with it? The whole range, try and build the whole thing together. So that will go months before. They will then be talking to the caterers, finding a caterer wherever they're going to be. So this food needs to go on board an aircraft in Sydney, Australia. Somebody's going to need to go and find a caterer, find one that's going to be of a good price, that has a good quality, that's going to be safe, because we don't want to poison people at 30,000 feet. That's not a good thing to do.
On a 9-hour flight.
On a 9-hour flight with restricted toilets.
Yeah.
You don't want to be doing that. So how do you find a kitchen that's going to be able to do all those things at a price that you can afford? You're going to go and visit them. You're going to work with some suppliers who have some good credibility in the market.
Right.
And then you're going to have to work with the chefs there. Can they interpret the menu? Can they get the things that you're talking about? Can they create a cottage pie that people are going to recognize?
That doesn't have cottage
cheese in it, preferably. But can you get some local produce on the menus as well? Is there local fish that you should be using to reduce your cost and to perhaps increase the quality? And then can you do that day in, day out for months and months and months and months?
Right.
And once you get it agreed and you price it all out, you get everything priced, how many spears of asparagus are you going to get, and what's the cost for those spears of asparagus?
Right.
What's the cost for the whole dish? What's the cost for the whole meal? Can you afford it? Is that within your budget? And then give them the green light, and they have to produce it, put it on board, at the same time as trying to coordinate that with communicating to the crew, so the crew know what they're going to get, communicating with the menu printers, because the menu will probably be printed on the other side of the world. Make sure that what's on the printed menu matches with the food.
What's in
That's what the crew are expecting, so that it all comes together. And the customer is sitting there, having spent usually thousands and thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever, to sit there, that they're getting something that they think has just been produced just for them.
Right.
But probably at the same time, the kitchen was producing tens of thousands of other meals that day.
Wow. It's crazy to think there's that much work that goes into that meal and that first class kind of experience. In the Middle East, with such a great reputation for that in-flight service, how did you keep that up? Like, what did you add when you were there? What was your flair?
I think it's constantly working with the different suppliers. So one of the things, having worked with so many different airlines and been in the industry for so long, I know a lot of people. And so being able to pick up the phone and call people and ask, how do we actually improve this? What can we do? Is there a way of supplying? Can we improve the supply of caviar? Can we get better smoked salmon? How can we improve the sausages? those
Right.
sort of things, and trying to find new and different ways of improving the service on board. It could be ingredients, it could be suppliers, it could be a way of finding a way of actually getting a product available somewhere where it just isn't. There are some places that airlines fly where there are no kitchens.
Right.
So you might have to send the food, if you like, as we call it, belly loaded in the cargo hold of the aircraft for use on the way back.
Bring it up and
to
then
bring it up
reheat
and put it on the way back. And that's a whole nother challenge. But if you can find a way of not having to do that by working with somebody to open a kitchen somewhere, then you might all of a sudden find better quality.
Right.
And that can reduce your cost because you're not flying the weight around. You can improve the freshness of the product,
Right.
and all of a sudden make a big difference.
So when you and I met, we were both at WestJet, and you had quite the task in front of you. WestJet, its roots of being peanuts and the ham and cheese croissant, if you will, morphed a bit when we purchased the Dreamliners, and you were brought in to kind of spearhead that process. So walk me through how that went, because
Well, I mean,
I think we landed on a great product. If you've been up in the premium product, but how did that go?
Well, it was really good. WestJet had a few years of, if you like, trying long haul flying with the 767s, which had a questionable reliability.
Often stopping in Iceland.
Yes, they stopped a lot and didn't fly, but they had a great product, and the great WestJet service meant that the aircraft were always full.
Yeah.
But when the Dreamliners came on board, the 787s, the airline wanted to, if you like, really take the fight to the competitors and have a world-class business cabin, premium economy and economy. And they needed to find a way of catering those with products that were really going to, if you like, stand up against the competition.
Right.
And they wanted to fly in some big international markets like London Heathrow, like the Far East, and they really wanted to be able to compete. So they needed to, if you like, stand up a whole new team. The great thing was there were some really, really good people in WestJet who'd done a lot of work around, and you make jokes around the ham and Swiss croissant, but even that was difficult. And there was new and different food that had been flying in the premium cabin on WestJet for a while. So there was already the start, and all we had to do was, if you like, multiply that and take it to a next level for the Dreamliners. So we had to do that quickly. Right. Because I think when I joined in late 2017, the Dreamliners were just over a year away.
Yeah.
They came in 2019. And so we had basically a year to come up with a product that was going to be good for all three cabins. And we did it. And the team did a huge amount of work with a huge amount of supplier support. We did some, if you like, hot housing. We got, I think it was 5 suppliers, and we locked ourselves in a hotel room with them for almost a week. And we basically didn't come out until it was almost done to enable us to get the work done in the time that we did. And actually getting those suppliers locked in the room to work together was, I think, pretty much a first for all of us.
Right. So which suppliers, like not names, but it's not just suppliers of food, it's suppliers of
equipment,
hardware.
it's equipment suppliers. So knives and forks, glassware, the plastic trayware, the cardboard boxes, all the different elements that you get, the blankets, all the different items that, if you like, you're handed on the aircraft, it come from somewhere, and it doesn't only come from one supplier, and they are made and manufactured all around the world.
Right.
And the key is to try and find, again, the quality that you want at a price you can afford, but also with decent sustainability credentials. So I think the blankets on WestJet were made from recycled plastic bottles, and trying to get those in enough quantity so that you're ready to fly all everywhere around the world, and you've got freshly laundered blankets, is a challenge.
Right. And you had a year.
We had just about a year.
Just about a year to do that.
About a year to do it. And so it was good fun. There was a bit of blood, sweat and tears.
Yeah.
A lot of hard work and a lot of burning the midnight oil. But locking ourselves in a hotel room for a week was, I think, the only way we could get it done. And thankfully, the suppliers had the sense of humor to come along on that journey with us.
Yeah, no kidding. So it's funny. We were talking off camera, and I wanted to talk to you about this, but I think of that very famous airline story. I think it was United, or it could have been Delta, or American, where they took one tomato off the salad, and that saved millions. And that story's been told and told and told and told. And I could just see your face while I said it. You just cringed a little.
Yeah, it's a constant battle, because everything you put on board has a cost in its own right.
Of course.
And it has a weight. So if you could take an item off, you could save the cost of that item. You can also save the weight. So one of the really interesting things I'm getting a little bit evangelical about now is that we worked on it back in the day, is looking at all the items that are flying on board, whether it's cans of soda, Diet Coke, are you flying more than you need to? Because if you're flying a single can just around the network the whole time, the product is costing you money, and the weight, the fuel burn, and the carbon that's emitted because of that is quite significant. So how can you actually work to reduce the numbers, or just make sure you've got the right numbers to meet the customer need, and not extra that you don't really need?
Right.
And that's a constant challenge. So try and find ways of counting what comes off an aircraft. And I'm working with some companies now around how we can actually better count the items that come off aircraft.
Right. And knowing, being aware of the cost of like, it's staggering how much it costs to fly a can of Coke around that doesn't get drank. So and making sure you
catering is one of the large budgets of an airline. But it's not because the catering itself is expensive. Each individual cherry tomato, olive is not expensive in its own right.
Right.
But when you multiply it by the many thousands that you load on board, the multiplication of that ends up in being very big numbers.
Right.
And so the accountants do tend to look at the numbers very closely and go, how can we possibly be spending that amount on catering? And it's just the multiplication.
Right.
It's, if you're going to have good quality items, and we've all seen what's happened to food inflation, so it's only got worse. But if you're going to have good quality items,
right,
and you've got to have them there, if you're at the sharp end of the aircraft, if people want to choose, so you've got some element of choice for them. The more choice you have on board, you're going to fly items around. How do you make sure you're not flying items around that are just purely wasted?
Right.
And there's a constant challenge of trying to make sure you're flying items around that people want at the right price. It just comes to a big number.
Now, you hit on something that I want to ask about too, is, when you're flying around fresh food, if it doesn't get eaten, there's not just the cost of the weight, there's wastage and spoilage and that kind of thing. Talk to me about shelf stable. Like, I know that's something that you have focused on in the past, is trying to find items that don't expire or have a longer expiry date, so you don't end up with 50 sandwiches at your destination or 50 pieces of chicken that aren't being eaten.
And everybody's used to having shelf-stable items in their home. They pick up a bag of chips, they pick up a bag of cookies, and don't think twice about it.
Right.
Food, if you like, fresh food, is something that people expect to be fresh. And so they would expect their cottage pie to be freshly cooked or perhaps frozen and thawed and reheated, but shelf stable, so it's just lived on the shelf. It's not been refrigerated. It's not been frozen. People tend to feel a bit queasy about that.
Right.
And I don't know why, because they're quite happy taking a can off the shelf.
100%.
And that's fine. But because it's in some kind of plastic packaging, they're not so comfortable with it. You can see now people buying packets of rice just off the grocery store shelf, where only a few years ago you couldn't do that. It's just stick it in the microwave for a few minutes.
Yeah.
That's ambient food. So it is possible, and there are some very good manufacturers of some very good quality ambient food, which doesn't need refrigerating, which you could then heat on board an aircraft or anywhere else. And this kind of food is used in hospitals, etc. So it can be really good quality.
Right.
That if you don't use it, you could load it again for the next day's flights.
Right.
Whereas an item that's fresh would probably be thrown away because you couldn't be sure that it had been within the right temperature control.
Yeah, of course.
So there should be a way of doing that. And like I say, there are suppliers who produce some good quality food. I think it's going to be a while before that catches up and really finds a way on board the aircraft, because there are also an awful lot of or there isn't a lot of that food that's available that isn't so good.
Right.
But you can find some really good ones, and I think there's a great opportunity there. But you need to find a way of helping people to get over that almost ick factor of it. What do you mean it wasn't in the refrigerator?
Yeah, and it's funny because one of the things that I tend to gravitate to when I get on an aircraft is that cup of soup with those freeze-dried noodles that we're just adding hot water to. I'm completely fine with that. Right?
Or the cup noodles. People are fine with that. Yeah. But as soon as you have something that's like, feel like, I don't know, people think it's real food. People have been doing reconstituted mashed potato for years.
Right.
But food that you just peel off the lid and you stick it in the oven, it's like they seem to have a problem with that.
Right. Even though we all had TV dinners.
It'll change. It'll change, and that will change some of the economics, because all the fresh items that are on board the aircraft, whether it's the salads or the bread rolls or any of those items, if they're not ambient shelf stable, they will be thrown away at the end of the flight.
Right.
Because you don't want to risk the fact that it might have been out of temperature control, and then you have a risk of poisoning people. And again, you don't want to do that.
Right. It's not like you have unlimited space where you can just throw it in a fridge. I mean, we're talking very limited space.
Very limited space.
Even on big aircraft.
Even on big aircraft, and not all of the space is refrigerated either.
Right.
So having the refrigerated locations on an aircraft, those are in themselves very expensive space, because they have to have all that sort of compressor machinery that makes them cold.
Right.
And that is extra weight on the aircraft. So the people, when they're specifying the aircraft and specifying the galleys, they try and reduce the amount of cold space that is available, which just makes it even more difficult for the caterers, because there's less space that you can put fresh food in.
So this is just a massive logistics challenge across the board. That
Ultimately,
always
it is
changes.
logistics. It's people thought that we spend our lives sort of making food and trying new sandwiches and things like that. Most of it was logistics. It's supply chain and logistics. It's trying to make sure that the plates that come in from China meet up with the blankets that came in from Bangladesh, that meets up with the food that comes in from somewhere else, and the drinks that come from somewhere else, the wine from France, the soap from somewhere else.
Right.
And it all comes all at the same place at the right time to come on the aircraft. So that the customer, who thankfully is blissfully unaware of all of this most of the time, gets a great experience. But it is also amazing how upset people get when something isn't there that should be there.
Well, especially when you're paying,
That's the point.
like when I'm in the back of the aircraft paying an econo fare or a lower fare, my expectations aren't high. But the moment I'm putting $10,000 down, I do want my choice of wine. I do want my choice of meals.
And as soon as your choice of so you look at the menu and it's like, so you've got a choice of steak or chicken, and you say, I'll have the steak, and the crew member has to say, I'm really sorry, it's not available.
Yeah.
You immediately feel that you haven't had your $10,000 worth, even though actually the majority of that probably went on flying the aircraft and the crew training and the aircraft itself and the fuel to get you to where you're going.
Right.
You put almost an unbalanced amount of value in the fact you didn't get your steak.
No
and
kidding.
It feels quite personal.
When you were with Etihad in Qatar, they have such amazing first class cabins. Like it's almost a hotel on board.
Individual suite, yeah.
Right. That must add another layer of complexity as well. How do you deal with that? Like I've seen showers, I've seen like you said, a whole suite. How does that work? Like how do you plan that?
It's about, from a catering point of view, it's about providing additional choices.
Right.
So that the person can have all sorts of different options. From the cabin itself, providing all sorts of setups. So if you like maybe an entirely separate bed setup that the crew can create, in most cases, turn the chair into a bed, or in some cases, a standalone bed, and they can make that up for the customer.
Right.
In Etihad's case, on their A380s, they have the residence suite, which is a suite of a couple of rooms, one of which is a bedroom with a full double bed, which is made up right from the start, and a shower and a living room. So they're all separate, but each one has to be, if you like, curated and designed to the highest standards as if it was a 5-star hotel room. So you've got additional items. You may have artwork on the walls. You may have multiple different tablecloths and table napkins that you go and a range of glassware that means you've got glass for if somebody wants a martini or if they want I don't know, some kind of brandy after their meal.
Right.
And you've got to find space for all of those things.
Which, by the way, whenever I'm flying, I have brandy after the meal. It's fantastic. It's
good to know.
a nice little.
If you have it in a nice little glass and don't
nice
get
little
too upset
glass,
if it's
exactly.
not there.
Even a paper cup, I'm fine. I'm not too fancy. I want to get to what you're doing now, but before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about where you see the industry going, because you've had so much experience, and like you said, you have been in the catering side when it was basically bad food heated up and became a joke, like, oh, airport food, airline food.
And it is kind of strange where I went from not wanting to touch anything on board as a kid to now being responsible for curating it and getting it on board. And dare I say, on most flights, eating stuff on board as a sort of quality control.
Right, and I think we've gone from the old days to the glory days where everybody got a meal and it was almost first class for everybody. And then the rise of ultra low cost airlines came up and kind of took away all of the extras, right? The Spirits, the Ryanairs, kind of did away with all of the catering, and now those same airlines are starting to add things back to try to find that mix, right? Because they're competing with like a revamped British Airways, which has a great economy program, right? Like it's comparable price wise to
and
some of these.
It's all a big cycle. At the end of the day, it's all a big cycle because airlines are high capital cost, low margin businesses.
Right.
They might charge a lot for the tickets, but basically they are low margin businesses. Just the cost to run them is huge.
Right.
And so you only need the price of fuel oil to tick up a tiny bit, or the inflation rate for any of the other commodities, including food or labor cost to increase, and their margin is wiped out very, very quickly. And so they're constantly looking for ways to save cost.
Right.
Perfectly normal. But at the same time, they need to stand out in the market.
Yeah.
So more and more, the airlines, the long haul airlines, they're either flying, a Boeing aircraft, generally a 777 or a 787, or it's an Airbus, maybe an A380 or a 330 or something. Generally, the seats on board are pretty much the same, irrespective of which cabin. So you've got, the aircraft are the choice of two manufacturers.
Right.
The seats are pretty much the same. Mostly it's only people like you and me who could tell one business class seat from another in most cases. And so how do you stand out? Well, it comes down to the service that the cabin crew do and deliver, which is absolutely amazing what they have to deliver at 30,000 feet. And it's the different food product and finding different ways of doing that, and better wines, better food options, better choices provided in a different way, because flambe is not possible. You can't do a barbecue on board. You can't have everybody in economy stand up and go and stand at a buffet at the back of the aircraft. It's just not going to work.
Right.
So how can you do that? And try and find new and different ways is what it's all about.
So where do you see the industry going with the rise of what I like to call mixed airlines or hybrid airlines? Those airlines that have traditionally, and like the airline we worked at, WestJet was a bare bones airline who added an extra layer of service.
Yeah.
That seems to be the trend for airlines that are in that 25-year mark where they're trying to get that higher yield but keep their costs low. How do you see catering geared towards those airlines, and what's the future for them?
I can see I think in the same way as the airlines have gone, if you like, hybrid in terms of how they sell the different cabins, and instead of having a combined fare, they're actually splitting their fares, so you can bundle the different components as you want. That's going to include the onboard product as well.
Right.
Challenge there is for the crew as to how do they know that, Chris ordered, his seat. When he bought his seat, he bought the sandwich. When Simon ordered his, he didn't buy the sandwich, but he did order the bottle of wine. And we're sitting next to each other. How do they know what to deliver where? It's going to be a challenge, but technology will be able to help with that.
Right.
And I think ultimately that will be the way it goes, that you'll get to a place of much more mass customization. I think there will be more the ability to choose from a much broader range of offering delivered to the aircraft. So almost like an Uber Eats or a skip the dishes kind of idea, where you could choose from a much broader menu, perhaps pre-order, and that pre-order window, currently for most airlines, if you're ordering anything special for on board, you've got a 12 to 48 hour, sort of 24 to 48 hour window
Right.
within which, before your flight, that you have to have ordered it by. That length of time is going to shorten.
Right.
And so you may find a time where when you're checking in, and we're looking quite a way into the future, you'll be able to make a choice of what you want on board the flight that day. And
Right.
to start with, it's already happening to an extent in the first class cabins, less so in business. In time, it will come throughout the whole aircraft.
Whole cabin.
And yeah, also there will continue to be the airlines who don't want to offer any of that.
Right.
And there will be if you like, a no frills option, and that's absolutely fine too, because that comes with a different price point for people, and that's good.
Right.
The key ultimately has got to be to understand the customers better, and to really be clear with them about what it is they're going to get, and then provide them what it is you've promised them day in, day out, and over again, so that they're not disappointed.
So that leads me to my next question, and I'm glad you said that. When you're talking about getting to know the customer and getting to know what products fit them, you're now into consulting, am I correct?
Correct.
So walk me through how you're helping your clients get there, right? Because that, like I said, is a massive undertaking for an airline. How are you helping them?
Yeah, I mean, the concept of food and menus, whether you're in a restaurant, whether you're on board, is really simple, but it's not easy to make it happen.
Right.
And so trying to help the different businesses understand how they can be different, and how they can, if you like, make that difference stand out for their customers,
Right.
versus in a crowded marketplace versus everybody else, is ultimately the challenge. And one of the things that I'm trying to do now is to work on helping the different airlines, and it might be different food companies as well, but look at their end-to-end experience. Some of that will be in flight, some of it might be a lounge experience or even a check-in experience, to make sure that they are curated experiences that meet their marketing pledge to the customer. And
Right.
a lot of that is about getting to know the customer. It's amazing how many companies don't actually ask the customer. They don't actually know. They don't even spend much time asking their crew or even their frontline staff, what is it that could make life better or not?
Right. What are they seeing out there?
And and what is causing the problems?
Right.
Why is it that there? And it was a great example of an airport that was really struggling with check-in times at an airport, and check-in was causing all sorts of problems. The people at head office spent weeks trying to work out what the problem was. It was only when somebody got on an aircraft to that particular place and spoke to the team and said, what's the problem? It's this printer that doesn't work. And they swapped out the printer, and the queues went away, and satisfaction rates went up. And it was like,
Right.
for the sake of what was probably a couple $100 printer, it's like, speak to your people. And,
Right.
Actually just having those conversations, it's amazing how difficult some businesses find that.
There's a concept in lean. It's a Japanese phrase, gimbagoshi, where you actually go to where the work is being done to actually figure out not what's on the manual, not what's supposed to be done. What are they actually doing?
What's actually happening?
Somebody at head office thought that printer was working.
Yes.
That never even occurred to
Didn't
them.
even
right?
occur
Yeah.
that was going to be the problem. So
you're helping your clients go
to ask those questions,
Ask
and
those
to
questions.
understand what the challenges are, and to try and understand how to fix the issues more effectively, and probably much more cost effectively as well.
Right.
One part of what I'm doing is I'm working as part of a consultancy group, the Hayward Partnership,
Right.
who are a group of independent consultants who, between us, we cover off all sorts of different areas of the, if you like, the onboard product sphere, whether it's running catering units, whether
Right.
it's people who have actually run catering companies or on board. So we can bring to bear a lot of creativity into a lot of problems for a lot of different companies. So it's been great fun working with those folks as well, because I'm learning a lot from them and I love to learn new things.
Right, and at the same time, you're helping the clients get
And
to where they need to be
Helping
service-wise.
exactly, and trying to get them to understand the new ideas, and to understand how actually it's not a new idea to ask your team, but maybe it is for you, but maybe it's something you might want to do. Ask your cabin crew, what is it that the customers actually want? What are they asking for? And all of a sudden you get some amazing ideas come up.
Right.
At WestJet, we actually spent some time talking to the crew around, what is the spirit of Canada? What does it mean
What
to
does
you?
it mean to you? Yeah.
And then how can we turn that into reality on board? And you'll never get the answer from the customer. They'll never tell you, well, I want a cup that's blue and I want it to like this. And but they'll tell you, actually, I'm looking for a refreshing experience. I want to sleep. And so then it's up to the airline team to work out, okay, how do we deliver something that enables them to sleep?
Right.
How do you refresh them? What can you do that meets that need that they have?
I'm dying to ask this question. I normally ask questions about where people like to travel or what's their favorite place.
Worrying
But I don't care about that right now because this one question is popping up. What is your favorite meal that you've had on board a plane?
I'm not going to say cottage pie.
Not the cottage,
Not
not
the
the
cottage
cottage
pie.
cheese pie.
No.
But like you must have tried everything. What is blowing you away? What is the
I can tell
Simon's
you
favorite meal?
One of the meals that we put on board British Airways, which everybody told me it will never work. This was in first class, and everybody said you can't do that. It just won't work. It won't be accepted. But we could not put enough on board when we did it. Was sausage and mash.
Right. Wow.
Because the people flying in that first class cabin, they probably ate at a Michelin-starred restaurant the night before. They're probably going out for dinner when they get where they're going. They know you can't do the most amazing food on board. They just want comfort food.
Right.
But if you can do that at a very, very high quality level, then that's going to be the best thing. And they love that. Good gravy, good mashed potato, really good quality sausages. Couldn't put enough on board. For me, it's something, and probably the one that I like the best, and it was actually American Airlines who did it way back in the day, and it was coming out of somewhere in the Caribbean. It was a chicken breast, vegetables, mashed potato, and gravy, and it
just blew your hair back.
absolutely stunning because it was absolutely perfect for where I was at the time and what I wanted on that particular flight. It wouldn't have worked in other places, but it's like going to. If you go on vacation and you try something great when you're on vacation, it's wonderful. You're in Cuba or Dominican Republic,
Right.
and you have some, and you bring some home,
You're like, this
expecting it to be exactly
feel the same way.
Exactly. So it's all situation specific, which is also one of the challenges of how you get food and catering on board an airline to be something that people love, because it's different people every day, and they're going to have different expectations and different views of it every day.
Well, Simon, thank you so much for spending some time with me.
It's been great.
This has been fantastic.
Yeah, loved it.
I highly recommend it to anybody who is having you on as a podcast guest to eat before, because I'm really hungry now.
Yes.
The bangers and mash really brought out the English side of my family. My
love it.
wife is from London, and it takes me back to her side of the family. So thank you for making me hungry, and thank you for spending some time with me today.
Great being here. Thanks, Chris.
That's all our time on the Open Skies podcast for today. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, and I can't wait to bring new episodes to you shortly.